The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 865, and it is coming to you on Monday, the 19th of June, 2017. On this program, I will continue the topic, mortgages. What is a mortgage? This will be part 2, and I would be finishing the program so that whereas I had indicated last week that I would begin reading extracts from Dr. Cyrus's book, I will do that next week, Divi, because the extracts would take up some time, and I will then do a topic that would be of short duration. So next week, Divi, extracts from A Harvest Richer Than Gold, Dr. Cyrus's 4th book, which will be launched in the first week of July. And copies of the books are already in St. Vincent and Grenadines, available from Dr. Cyrus at his home at Botanic Gardens. As usual, I would like to send condolences to all families which have suffered recent bereavements. And when I taped the program last week, Monday, I had not realized that the official search had been suspended. So to all intents and purposes, the search has been given up. The persons who were missing have not been found, and the families are in our prayers. I would like especially to send condolences to the family of Miss Patient Henry of Richland Park, and one of her daughters, Miss Pearl Henry, former member of the St. Vincent and Grenadines Police Force, was a good friend of mine. She emigrated to the United States several years ago, and I ran into her and she told me her mom had died, and she's back for the funeral. Condolences to you, Sister Pearl. And to the family of Miss Inez Cornwall of Rockies, a lady I've known since in the 1960s. When I went to live at Rockies, she was a good friend of my mother, and I want to say condolences to the bereaved family, as well as all families which have suffered bereavements. Sad to hear of yet another couple of shooting deaths. When will it cease? Okay, I want to go right into the topic of mortgages, where I left off last week, Monday. And thank you for the feedback I've got from many of you. Said that you found the program informative as usual. And you asked me several questions about mortgages, and based on the questions you asked, I am guided in what I say on the rest of the program by way of explanation. And most of you are fascinated by the last remarks I made when I said that when you mortgage a property, particularly one into which you live, it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the institution from which you borrowed the money to acquire it, or even to renovate it. If you have an existing property and you go to the bank to borrow some money to have it renovated, the mortgage takes the form of a conveyance from yourself to the bank by way of legal mortgage. And when you have repaid the money, the bank reconveys it to you. And when I say bank, I also mean all lending institutions, like credit unions, insurance companies, building societies, or indeed individuals. Individuals can lend money on the security of mortgages as well. For the sake of completeness, there are certain mortgages called equitable mortgages, but you hardly hear about them nowadays. But that is where instead of the borrower conveying the property to the institution from which the money is being borrowed, the borrower merely deposits his title deed with the institution. So an equitable mortgage, subject to certain refinements, but to be simplistic, an equitable mortgage occurs where a person borrows money on the security of a title deed, lodges the title deed with the lending institution, and borrows money. But the mortgage document which the borrower signs would have a clause saying that any time the institution calls on the borrower to sign a conveyance, the borrower has no choice but to sign it. When I entered practice 37 years ago, a few institutions lend money on the security of equitable mortgages. But nowadays, almost every institution which lends money wants a full mortgage deed by which the property is conveyed into the name of the institution, and it becomes theirs in law. They become the owners of the mortgage property, and when the loan is repaid, they will convey it back to the borrower who would have repaid the money. Over the years, institutions have found that there is a reasonably high rate of default on mortgages. There is one particular kind of mortgage default which is deliberate and very, very distressing. That is where a person mortgages property jointly with another person and then decides not to take part in the repayment. Usually in cases where the person goes abroad. This is what happens from time to time. And I hope none of you listening to me would find yourself caught up in what I would call a scam. Let us say two people form a relationship. They may or may not get married, but together they acquire a parcel of land, and together they go to an institution to borrow money to build on the land. But unknown to one, the other one has the intention of taking the bulk of the money which is borrowed and going abroad, running away, leaving the one behind in what the old people call pocketery, which is a corruption of the word purgatory, means in serious, serious financial trouble. So if you're going to go jointly with somebody to borrow money to build, make sure you can trust the person. And hope it's not a case where when the loan is borrowed, the person then takes the bulk of the money and unknown to you books a flight and away the person goes. So if you know that you're dealing with a person who has a US visa and is worthless minded, be careful. be very, very careful. In the usual run of things where there is honesty on both sides, nothing is wrong with two people jointly taking out a mortgage. But where two people approach a lending institution for a loan to be secured by property and they are not married, the institution would be extremely careful how it deals with them. The institution would have to be satisfied of the sources of income of the two persons, and usually a prudent institution would make inquiries as to the character and antecedents of the persons with whom they are dealing to make sure that the risk they take in lending money to these two people is justified in the circumstances. So let us say everything goes well, money is borrowed, a property is bought or land is bought and a house is built on the land, and the loan is being paid back month by month. As I said before, because the vast majority of mortgages are legal mortgages, the institution owns the property. So that in case of default, if the loan is not paid back or the installments are not being serviced as they become due, the institution can put you out of the premises if it is a dwelling house. Many people feel that, the most they can do is sell you out, and while the attempts are being made to sell the property, you are still living there. But the institution would have a choice, They can actually go to court and get an order based on what you have signed, because you would have authorized that in this long, thick, many-claused mortgage document. And they can get a court order putting you out and taking over the property. You can rent the property so that they can get the installments of the loan paid. Therefore, when you default on a mortgage of a property in which you live, it is a serious matter. You can be put out of the premises. When that happens, it is said in law that the mortgagee, that is the institution lending the money, has gone into possession of the mortgage premises. Now, there's one good reason why it is rare for a mortgagee to go into possession. Because if a mortgagee goes into possession of mortgage premises, the law requires a very strict accounting from that mortgagee in possession. You have to be extremely careful that you don't let the place get run down. You have an owner's responsibility to maintain the property at the value in which you met it. You have to be extremely careful that you're not guilty of what the law calls waste, meaning allowing the property to get run down. Because if the borrower can prove in court that when the lender took over the mortgage property and became a lender in possession, a mortgagee in possession, the property was worth, say, $250,000. And by reason of their negligence, they may have rented it to careless people who damage the place and don't take care of it. so that if the value depreciates by reason of want of care of those actually occupying the property, that depreciation is the responsibility of the lender, so that when eventually the property is sold, the lender has to compensate the borrower for any unusual depreciation in the property while the lender was in possession. For that reason alone, lenders do not frequently go into possession of mortgage properties. Too much headache, they stay out of that. But they can if the circumstances so dictated. A frequent source of friction between lender and borrower occurs after there has been default in the monthly mortgage installments and the lender calls sale of the mortgage property, which the lender can do. Anytime the loan goes into default and remains in default for X number of months, and the mortgage deed would say how many months default. Sometimes 1 month default can trigger repossession. But no bank will repossess a property, no credit union or insurance company or building society will repossess a property if the borrower is 1 or 2 months in default, unless it is a pattern, a habit. Normally you get a little grace period, but that grace period is purely in the discretion of the lender. The lender hasn't got to give you a grace period if you're behind in your mortgage. They can say, pay up or we'll sell you out. But most lenders will know their customers and they would work along with them. If, for example, they have a customer has a period of difficulty, which the lender understands, the lender will say, all right, for the next few months, just pay the interest or pay, 80% of the interest as you can manage until you can repay the loan, the full installments when things improve. The moral of that is that if you have borrowed money on the security of premises in which you live, as soon as you start to get into financial difficulties and you can't meet the monthly repayment, go in and talk to the institution from which you would have borrowed the money. Don't let them have to send letter and letter, and don't keep dodging. No, the best thing, from the time you run into difficulty, go in and talk to the institution. You will find that lending officers are very understandable, and they would listen and work along with you if you can satisfy them that, look, it's not because you are bad-minded or dishonest, it's just that you had an unusual occurrence in your finances. You got into some trouble temporarily financially, and you're going through a rough patch, but hopefully you will get out of it in due course. Go in and talk to the institution before things reach too far, and you will find that they would listen and work along with you. It's those who are in default and hide away, don't go in and talk about it. So all the lender knows is that month by month the money isn't coming in and they can't hear anything from the borrower. And then they get annoyed, they put it in the hands of one of their bailiffs. And next thing you know, you see your property advertised in the newspaper for sale. So please, once you get into difficulties, go and speak to your credit union, go and speak to your bank. tell them what it is and be frank. Don't go with some lies, you know. Don't make up stories, because it's a small place, and if it is found out that you are lying, then nobody will trust your word. And you may get over that difficulty, but next time you get into difficulties, who would believe you if you have a history of telling lies? Speak the truth. People understand. If push comes to shove and you simply can't pay back the loan, and you have no reasonable prospects of being able to make repayment according to the schedule set out in your mortgage deed, then you may have to discuss with the institution selling the property and looking for something less expensive, depending on what the arrears on the mortgage are. So you would say, okay, you are so much in arrears, and you figure, well, if you put the property in the market, you can get so much for it. So you yourself can organize the sale of your property in conjunction with the money lender, because anytime mortgage property is sold, the first thing that has to come out of that new buying price is the repayment of the arrears or the amount owing on the mortgage. So some people might be able to sell a property, get enough to pay off the arrears of the loan they have, and may not even have to continue in debt. They may then be able to buy a property of lesser value and go along like that. Suppose a family had, you know, several children who have grown up, gone abroad, studied, and, you know, get married and so on, and you have the mother and the father end up in a 4-bedroom house, which is still mortgaged. Then it might be sensible for them to sell that property and look for a 2-bedroom. Nothing wrong with the mother and father living in a 2-bedroom house. That's one possibility. But when you discuss these things with the lending institution, they themselves might give you ideas how you can get along, how you can cope. If push comes to shove and the property has to be sold, whether you can afford another one or not, then other considerations occur. Recently, when I say recently, within the last 10 years, the courts have worked out some principles governing foreclosure sales. That is, somebody can't pay back the mortgage, the institution wants to sell them out to get back their money, and the courts have developed rules so that they vary from case to case, but generally the institution has a duty to get as fair a price for the property as is possible in the circumstances. So the courts have now said that the institution has to make reasonable efforts to advertise the property and take every step necessary and desirable, but within reason, to get as good a price as possible in the state of the market for the property, so that when it is sold not probably at the best price which is available, but at the best price which in the circumstances the lender can get. So the days when an institution was allowed to sell a $400,000 property for $150,000 and take what is owing to them, and the mortgagor has nothing to get, those days have changed, times have changed. But there is a lot of variation in these principles, that anytime you find yourself being sold out by a lending institution, you should go and get your own independent legal advice. Your lawyer wouldn't be able to stop the sale, but your lawyer might be able to see to it that you get the bank gets the best price possible for your property, so that when they take out what is owing to them, you have a little something left for yourself. Final thing I have to say is that there's no society that could exist without mortgages, because people don't have cash saved up to enable them to buy property when they want, or even to finance a business. You have to borrow. That is what banks are there for, and so on. And there is always no guarantee that something might not happen where the borrower finds he or she just, or they can't pay back the loan. Again, let common sense prevail. You can't be wrong and strong. If you are seriously in arrears, you can't go and say you're quarreling with X and Y and so on. If the fault is yours, admit the fault. But speak about it, reason with the institution, and usually a solution is found in most circumstances. All right? Okay, so that is it from this edition of The Law and You. I look forward to being of further service to you next week, Monday, DB, for another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. Do have a pleasant week, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls. I hope you enjoyed Father's Day, all of us fathers. May the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC, and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.